You wanted to be clean, God knows you did, but you weren't, and you wouldn't be. Not today, not tomorrow, not this year. You wake up with the taste of smoke in your mouth and the itch already under your arms. The same clothes you wore yesterday and the day before cling to your skin, damp with sweat, stiff with dust, reeking of ash and lard. You slept beside a fire that never really warmed you, but left your hair smelling like burned straw and your lungs rasping before dawn. The straw mat beneath you is full of grit and crushed fleas, and someone you don't know who, maybe the baby, pissed on it 2 nights ago. No one cleaned it. You just turned it over. You scratch your neck, then your scalp, then your leg. You know better than to pick at the bites, but your fingers move before you think. A tiny red welt opens and blades. You wipe it on your shirt and keep moving. You step outside. The air is cold. The air is dry. The air is dirty. You smell the pigsty before you see it. You step through the mud, but it's not just mud, it's manure and waste and rotting food. It squelches up between your toes through a hole in your boot. You don't flinch, you're used to it. There's water in the bucket, but it's gray. It's the same water you used to rinse the cooking pot last night, and the same water someone dipped a cloth in to wipe a cut. You splash some on your face anyway. It doesn't feel better. It feels sticky, the dirt doesn't leave, it just moves around. You wipe it with a corner of your tunic, but the cloth is stiff and oily. You don't smell cleaner, you just smell like wet wool. You think about bathing for a second. But then you think about what that means, hauling water, heating it, sharing it, sitting naked in a wooden tub while the wind pushes through the cracks in the wall. You've done it before. You got out feeling colder than you went in. And your skin still itched after, so you skip it, again, because you have work to do. The firewood won't split itself, the animals won't feed themselves, the children are already coughing. And the smell, the constant, sour, acrid weight of filth that clings to every fold of your body that can wait. Because here, in this life, clean is not a goal, it's a fantasy. A fading thought between one obligation and the next. Something you wish for but never really chase. Something you forget until the itching comes back, and it always does. Clean didn't mean what you think it means, not in 1200 AD. It didn't mean sterile, it didn't mean lemon-scented. It didn't mean fresh cotton, mint toothpaste, antibacterial soap, or warm running water. No, clean, for you, for your village, for your class meant this, not covered in visible feces. That was the bar. If your tunic didn't stink so badly that the priest refused you at Mass, you were clean. If your hands weren't black with soot or cow blood, you were clean. If your hair didn't visibly move with lice, if your skin didn't peel from boils, if your breath didn't turn the goat's head, you were clean enough. No one you knew had white sheets, no one you knew had towels. You dried yourself with the same cloth you used to cover dough. You didn't scrub your body every morning. You didn't own a mirror. You didn't floss. You didn't know what plaque was. Your teeth rotted in place until they fell out, and when they did, you were told it was God reminding you to be humble. You didn't wear deodorant. You masked body odor with smoke, with herbs tucked into your collar. With ash rubbed into your armpits, it didn't hide the smell, it just changed the shape of it, and no one judged you for it because they were just like you. The smell of a human being wasn't offensive, it was expected. You weren't aiming for freshness, you were aiming for tolerance, not to be shunned, not to be called cursed, not to attract flies while speaking. If you were clean enough to stand still without someone backing away, that was a win. Even the upper class didn't meet your standards of clean. They bathed, yes, more than you, but not daily, not with soap, and their perfumes were not for hygiene. They were to cover rot, rot in their breath, rot in their wounds. Rot in their rooms, linen was reused, underwear if they had it was rarely washed, silk trapped sweat, fur trapped fleas, gold-covered teeth lost to decay. Clean in 1200 wasn't about pride, it was about distance. How far can I get from stink? How much can I scrape off with cold water and rough cloth? How long can I hide the smell of my own body? You didn't want to be filthy. No one did, but you weren't chasing sparkle. You were chasing survival without shame. That was clean, and even that was hard. Water in your world wasn't a solution. It was a question, a risk, a gamble. You needed it for drinking, for cooking, for cleaning, but every time you reached for it, you asked yourself, what else is in this bucket? You didn't have plumbing. You didn't have filtration. You didn't even have the guarantee that the water from your village well hadn't just been used by someone to rinse out blood or piss or something worse. The stream nearby, the one that curves behind the churchyard, that's where the animals bathe, that's where the tanner dumps waste, that's where your neighbor washes his infected foot and where a child vomited last week. You knew the water was dirty. Everyone did, but you drank it anyway. You had to. Boiling it, that required firewood, that meant time, that meant fuel you probably didn't have. And even when you boiled it, it didn't taste clean, it tasted flat, warm, bitter. Still you drank because thirst kills faster than filth. And what about washing with it? In summer maybe, if the weather was kind, if the sun stayed out, if no one else needed the bucket. Maybe you'd strip down behind the hut, pour cold water over your back, scrub your arms with a cloth that never truly dried. It didn't feel refreshing, it felt sharp. The cold cut your skin open. The cloth scraped old dirt but left new scratches, and if you bathed too often, people stared. Why are you trying to be better than us? Why waste water when the crops are dry? Why expose your body even in private? Washing wasn't just hard, it was suspicious. And in winter, you didn't even try. The idea of bathing in snowmelt, of dragging ice-heavy water through wind, of standing naked in air that bit your bones, it was unthinkable. You wore the same clothes for weeks. You washed your hands only when blood stuck. Your feet never dried. Your hair clumped with grease. And when you finally did bathe, if you were lucky, it wasn't alone. You shared water in tubs, in wooden barrels. One after the other, family members, neighbors, the cleanest person went first, the filthiest went last, and by the time it was your turn, the water was dark, oily, floating with hair, with soap scum, with flakes of skin. But you climbed in anyway. Because even that was rare, and sometimes after bathing you got sick, because your pores were open, because your body was cold, because the water wasn't just dirty, it was dangerous. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid, fevers with no name. Illnesses that started in the gut and ended in the grave. People didn't always connect the dots, but the fear lingered. The old ones said, too much water kills faster than dirt, so you learned to live with grime, to wipe instead of wash, to smoke instead of scrub, to stink instead of suffer. Because in the Middle Ages, water was not your friend, it was a luxury and a threat, and either way you could never trust it. You didn't have your own space, not a room, not a bed. Not even a bowl, everything was shared. The house wasn't yours, it was your family's and maybe your cousins, and maybe the sick aunt no one talked about. One room, one fire. One heap of straw in the corner, flattened from years of sleep, sweat, childbirth, and death. You didn't have a bed, you had a spot, on the floor, maybe against the wall if you were older, maybe near the door if you were the smallest. You curled up against whoever lay next to you, mother, brother, grandparent, stranger, not out of love, but out of need. Body heat was the only blanket you could afford. The blanket, if there was one, was shared too. It smelled like smoke, old milk, and mildew. It was never washed. If it ripped, it was stitched shut with whatever thread someone could find. If it bled, it dried in place. If it got infested, lice, fleas, bedbugs, you kept using it anyway. Because everything else was worse. You shared clothes, not just between siblings, between generations. A tunic passed down from your father's father now covered your back, patched 3 times, sleeves uneven, collar stiff with dried sweat and skin. Undergarments, if you had them, weren't changed daily, maybe not even weekly. Washing them was too much work, drying them took too long, so they stayed on even when damp, especially when damp. You shared tools, cups, bowls, razors. Lice combs, soap, when it existed, was a family item. 1 bar for 10 people, stored in a box, hard as bone, sharp at the corners. You rubbed it between your hands for 5 seconds, then passed it on. No one lingered. You didn't enjoy cleaning, you performed it like a duty, with eyes down and fingers numb. And you shared the dirt, the literal, crawling, biting dirt. Lice didn't care whose head was whose. They traveled from braid to braid, beard to beard, hood to hood. Everyone scratched, behind the ears, at the nape, at the waistline where cloth pressed against skin. You scratched in church, you scratched while eating. No one looked twice. It wasn't impolite, it was expected. Rats lived in the corners, fleas nested in the straw, mites burrowed into damp wool, skin infections passed through shared towels, foot fungus spread on the wet floorboards. Someone had a rash, now everyone had a rash. Someone's scab opened, now it's on the stool, the door latch, the bed. You didn't have disinfectant, you had spit, you had rags soaked in brine. You had herbal paste from an old woman who'd seen too many wounds to flinch anymore. You didn't speak about these things, you just lived with them. It was part of being poor, part of being alive. You learned to ignore the itch. To rub the same sore until it numbed. To clip your nails short so you didn't tear open your own skin while sleeping. You picked lice from your daughter's scalp like you were shelling peas. You saw the red ring on your husband's arm and whispered a prayer. It wasn't the kind that spread to the chest. There was no privacy, no separation, no individual hygiene. Cleanliness wasn't personal, it was communal. And the community was always dirty. Soap wasn't soft, soap wasn't gentle. Soap wasn't pink or blue or lavender scented. Soap in the Middle Ages was a hard, gray, stinking brick if you were lucky enough to ever touch it. Most people didn't because soap was made, not bought, and making it required time, skill, and ingredients that were neither easy to find nor pleasant to handle. The basic recipe. Animal fat, lard, tallow, boiled down from the carcasses of pigs, goats, or whatever died that week, mixed with ashes. Not clean white ashes from a modern oven, wood ash, thick and sooty, scooped from the edge of last week's fire. Then comes lye, an alkaline substance leached from more ash and water, corrosive to skin, dangerous to the eyes. You stir it, you heat it. You pour it into molds made from whatever wood or clay you had, then you wait for weeks. While it hardens into something that might work, when you finally used it, it didn't feel smooth. It didn't foam like a luxury. It scraped, it dried your skin, it burned if you had cuts, it cracked open old scabs. It left behind a smell that wasn't floral, wasn't minty, wasn't clean. It smelled like boiled fat and smoke because that's what it was. And if you didn't make it yourself, you had to buy it. But soap cost money, real money, coin money, which most people didn't have, so they went without. The nobles used it more often. Sometimes imported soap from Castile or Marseille, softer, whiter, perfumed with olive oil or herbs, but even they didn't bathe every day. They used scented cloths, potpourri, and oils. For you, a peasant, a serf, soap was for holy days, for weddings, for births, for when the midwife came. You kept the bar wrapped in cloth, buried in a chest, hidden from children who might waste it. And when you used it, it was fast. You didn't have the luxury to stand and scrub. You rubbed it over your arms, your legs, your feet, the areas that got caked in mud. You didn't waste it on your back. You didn't scrub between your toes unless something was bleeding. Hair, only if lice had taken over completely. And when the soap ran low, you used less. You rationed. You let dirt win for a while. There was no scent of freshness. No floral mist. The smell of clean was absence of rot, of waste, of blood. If you could stand next to someone and they didn't wince, that was enough. You were clean enough. And the bar of soap, it sat in the dark again, hardening, waiting for another emergency or another funeral. Bathhouses existed, that's the part most people forget. In towns and cities, especially during the early and high Middle Ages, public bathhouses were real places where people could strip down, heat water, and wash. In theory, it was a gift: warmth, soap, privacy, a few hours of feeling human again, but in reality, it wasn't that simple because bathhouses came with a price and not just in coin. First, there was the shame. You walked into a bathhouse naked or nearly naked, in front of others, sometimes with strangers, men and women, separated in some places, not in others. There were no showers, no partitions, just steam, heat, and bodies. And in a world ruled by fear and strict order, nakedness was never just nakedness. It was a moral question, a temptation, an accusation waiting to happen. Church officials preached that public bathing was dangerous, not just to your soul, but to your virtue. That where people undressed, sin followed. That too much focus on the body was a doorway to lust, to adultery, to heresy. Some clerics went as far as calling frequent bathing a sign of vanity, pride, or even witchcraft. Clean skin could mean a dirty soul. You were told to cleanse your spirit, not your flesh. Second, there was disease. The bathhouses became known not just for washing, but for transactions, sexual, financial, criminal. They weren't policed. They weren't sanitized. Over time, they earned a reputation for being brothels in disguise. Some really were. Others were just full of desperate people trying to feel better. But by the 14th century, as syphilis spread and plague returned, bathhouses were viewed with suspicion. People feared they were breeding grounds for infection, a place where hot water opened your pores to demons or sickness or worse, each other. And then came the bans. In many places, bathhouses were shuttered, outlawed. The church didn't destroy them outright, it simply labeled them dangerous, immoral, unholy. And in a world where nearly every man and woman feared hell more than disease, that was enough. People stopped going or went in secret or went less often, and the places built to clean the body became symbols of everything the church warned you against: vanity, lust, danger, so you stayed home. You washed with cold water in a bucket, you wiped your arms with ash, you scratched and said nothing. You smelled like everyone else, which made it bearable, because treading too close to cleanliness might raise questions you couldn't afford. In the end, the church didn't ban water, it just made you ashamed to use it, and that was enough to keep you dirty inside and out. Clean clothes were a fantasy. You didn't have a closet, you didn't have drawers. You had one tunic, maybe two, if your family had a good harvest last year. A simple linen shirt, rough against the skin, hand-stitched, patched over and over again until the thread no longer matched the fabric. If it tore, you fixed it. If it bled, you wore the stain. If it stank, you shook it out, maybe dusted it with ash or herbs and put it back on. Washing that tunic, that was a task. First, you needed water, buckets of it, carried from the well or the stream. Cold, heavy, and limited. Then came the soap, if you had any, or more likely, lye, ash, or even just sand. You scrubbed with your hands over a stone or wooden board, grinding dirt into your knuckles until they cracked. No one washed clothes often, it took hours, it hurt, and in the cold months it was almost impossible. Wet cloth froze, hands froze, clothes didn't dry, they stiffened into shapes, hanging limp and hard from ropes strung over smoky fires. So people didn't wash often, and they didn't change often. You wore your shirt while working, eating, sleeping, shitting. You wore it until it stuck to your skin with sweat and grime. If it rained, maybe that counted as a rinse. If it snowed, maybe that helped the smell. Underwear, maybe if you were lucky, but not like modern briefs or bras, more like linen rags were wrapped each morning. washed rarely, and there was no rotation, no laundry day. If one piece of clothing got too wet or infested with lice, you laid it out in the sun, picked out what you could, and prayed. You didn't have spares, you didn't have options. Even nobles, the ones with finer fabrics with servants to do their washing, didn't have what you would call clean clothes. Silk trapped sweat, fur held in stink, perfume masked rot, your clothes aged with you, the collar frayed. The sleeves thinned, the elbows tore open from labor. You didn't retire them, you reshaped them. Turned old shirts into aprons, old aprons into rags. You cleaned your child's wound with cloth that once covered your back in winter. And when you slept in what you wore. There was no bedtime outfit, no cotton pajamas. Just the same shirt, same trousers, same thick layer of skin, soot, sweat, and ash, curled up beside the same people, under the same blanket, breathing the same air. Clean clothes weren't part of life. They were a memory from feast days, a hope for weddings, a miracle for funerals. The rest of the time, you wore what you had, and you learned to live with the smell of yourself. You weren't dirty because you wanted to be. You were dirty because the world around you made it impossible not to be, because the water you drank came with disease, because the soap, if you had any, made your skin bleed. Because every time you tried to clean yourself, someone called it vanity, or sin, or waste. Because you shared your bed with rats, your clothes with mold, and your skin with everything that crawled, bit, or burrowed. Because the church told you purity was in the soul, not the flesh, and that too much concern for the body was dangerous. You weren't lazy, you were tired, you weren't careless, you were surviving, you didn't stink because you didn't know better. You stank because there were no better options. Cleanliness wasn't a matter of effort, it was a matter of class, of geography, of weather, of access. You could walk 10 miles and still not find a working well. You could boil water all day and still not make it safe. You could scrub until your fingers blistered and still feel the same itch return by nightfall. And if you ever dared to complain, someone older would tell you, "This is the way it's always been." And so you stopped asking. You didn't dream of being clean. You dreamed of not itching, of not bleeding from your scalp, of not waking up stuck to your shirt with dried sweat, of not watching your child scratch until they cried. And slowly you adjusted. You learned where to scratch first, when to wash just enough, how to sit so the chafing hurt less. You learned that the smell of your body was normal, that your clothes would never feel soft, that water was for drinking maybe, and soap was for the rich definitely. You learned to stop noticing, and then you taught your children to do the same. So no, you couldn't stay clean. Not because you gave up, but because the world gave you no chance, and after a while you didn't even call it dirt anymore. You just called it life. You were born into it. You slept in it. You worked through it. You died with it still under your nails. You would be dirty. You would get used to it.